In 1971, the New York State Legislature enacted full vacancy decontrol, a policy applicable to all apartments that became vacant on or after June 30th of that year. Since then, if certain conditions are met, landlords can deregulate their apartments. But the problem is, there's very little oversight of those conditions. And because plenty of landlords have exploited the situation, legally and illegally, many fear that we could be headed to the complete dismantling of our rent regulation system.
Well, last week, with the support growing in Albany for an end to vacancy decontrol, Mayor de Blasio proposed a sweeping expansion of tenant protections for the city's 1 million rent-regulated apartments. But tenants' rights advocates don't feel the mayor is going far enough. And here to talk about this very complex issue is Council Member Helen Rosenthal. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Jose Lopez, he's the lead organizer for Make the Road New York. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And we're also happy to have Thomas Waters. He's a policy analyst for the Community Service Society. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Awesome. You know, this is an issue that affects so many New Yorkers. So basically, can you tell us, Ms. Rosenthal, what exactly is vacancy decontrol?
So vacancy decontrol is the point at which the rent for one's apartment goes over $2,500 per month. Sounds like a big number, right? And it sounds like, well, at that point, perhaps people shouldn't be living there, you know, at a rent-regulated rate. The problem is on so many levels. One is all the things that the landlords do to get the apartment up to that dollar amount. Things like if a boiler needs to be fixed and that cost is X amount of dollars. Well, what the landlord does is spread that cost around all the apartments into perpetuity.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the boiler's been paid off within 2 years, but the renters are still carrying the cost of that burden. It's those types of things that make the dollar amount of the cost of the apartment go up so quickly. Another thing that happens, a tenant moves out. Now, according to the law, the landlord's allowed to increase that tenant's rent or that apartment's rent by 20%. No one is monitoring whether or not that happens.
Yeah.
What the landlord could do is sort of keep it off the market for a while and then rent it out at market rate.
Yeah.
Who would know?
Yeah.
There's no one really watching what's going on. So in fact, what we've seen is that over the last 10, 15 years, between 250,000 and 400,000 units that were meant to support and be affordable for families have in fact come out of rent regulation, are back in the market rates. And that's not plausible.
Well, it may not be plausible, but it's wholly legal. And on the other side, Jose, I got a mail from your organization, Make the Road, that was talking about some other actions that some landlords are taking that are outside of the bounds of the law, like trying to buy folks out of their rent-regulated apartments.
Right, and we're seeing that weekly at our organization. We represent over 16,000 members across the state. For our constituents in Brooklyn and Queens, what we're seeing, especially in Bushwick, next door to Williamsburg, which has been lost, is exactly what you're talking about. And so when there is a landlord who sees that there is a hot market, has a rent-regulated unit, and decides that he or she wants to get out of really what we call one of the last frontiers of affordable housing for our members.
Is that what you were talking about? Williamsburg has been lost? What does that mean?
That means it's been pretty much completely gentrified, right? There's still an enclave, there's still pockets on the south side.
Right.
But if you go to the Williamsburg waterfront, I go there and I think I'm in Miami. It's insane, right? Huge buildings, all glass, none of which are affordable. And then when you look at the surrounding community, where there used to be a rent-regulated stock, we're losing some of those, and we've lost a ton over the last decade as well. And so landlords are coming in and they're doing a few things. What we've seen happen are two. One is that they want you to break the lease early, or they want to break the lease early. And so they're going to come in and they're going to offer you a buyout. And we have members coming into our organization on a weekly basis saying, my landlord, although I've been there for over 10, 20 years, is offering me $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000 right now to pick up and go. Right? The other thing is the lack of repairs. So in some cases, landlords may not be able to offer 5 or 10 or 15, or maybe they do,
Right.
and the tenant declines. And so in fact, what they begin to do is harass the tenant, right? They turn off the boiler, they turn off the heat. If there are repairs that need to be made, they decline to make those repairs. I can't tell you how many tenants come into our office and say, well, the landlord told me it worked when I moved in, and now that it doesn't, he says it's my fault. I must have broken it, and so I need to deal with it. Yeah. And so when you have those kinds of things happening, what happens is that tenants just get fed up, right? Who wants to live in substandard conditions? Yeah. Who wants to live in a place where there's no heat, where there's no hot water? And so we're telling tenants to hold on, right? Because it's going to be really hard to find an affordable apartment if you leave. But under bad conditions, it's easier said than done.
Okay. Thomas, I want to bring you into the conversation. I have a quote by here. It says, a commission appointed by Rockefeller in 1973 recommended repealing vacancy decontrol. It's almost 40 years ago, finding that, quote, has neither stimulated new building construction, stopped abandonment, spurred renovation, nor has it brought substantial new money into the city's housing stock. It has led to tenant insecurity over tenure and harassment. So why do we still have it, and what is the current administration, what is their sort of policy at this point?
Well, that was a slightly different version of vacancy decontrol that existed back at the beginning of the 70s. And it was ended in 1974 by the passage of the Emergency Tenant Protection Act. Mm-hmm. So that was a defeat for the landlords. There's an enormous campaign by tenants to undo that back then. So the next time, the strategy of the landlords and their allies in Albany was to whittle away at tenant protections. So the old vacancy decontrol just said if an apartment becomes vacant, it is decontrolled. The current system has this decontrol based on rent, which fools many people into thinking that if apartments are going for $1,000 or $1,500 a month, that they're safe from vacancy decontrol. But that's not true. In reality, if you're in a neighborhood where apartments on the market, where there's anyone who's willing to pay $2,500 a month for an apartment, that apartment will be decontrolled on vacancy, using the 20% vacancy bonus, using individual apartment improvements, maybe with fraud, and then using the $2,500 a month threshold. So we have de facto vacancy decontrol everywhere where the market will support that kind of a rent, which is an ever-increasing part of the city, which is why the rate of decontrol is accelerating and has continued in spite of the fact that they raised the threshold 4 years ago. In many neighborhoods that made zero difference, right? Most places where apartments were being decontrolled before, they're still being decontrolled now. And in spite of the specific words that it says in the law, we do have vacancy decontrol very much like 1973. And that's why we're trying to rally tenants for another movement like 1974 to put an end to this.
Okay. Council member, can we build our way out of this?
Well, it's so interesting. So I was just thinking about what Jose was saying. These tenants have the laws, they have the rights. Doesn't matter, right? The landlords find ways to evict them out. And let's be clear, why are they there in the first place? They're there in the first place because the landlords were given tax breaks to build those buildings, right? So they're not there because it's out of the goodness of the heart of the landlord. The landlord benefited from those tax breaks, and that's the public policy. So now what's happening, you asked, can we build our way out of it? We can only build our way out of it if we have tenant protection laws that are real, enforceable, and will be enforced. So we can say we want to renew 421A for the new developers or not. We don't want to. The fundamental question is, and I think that de Blasio is trying his best to build and sustain more affordable housing. The fundamental question is, how do we do that? If we think as a public policy measure that there should be affordable housing in this city, and we're not going to let it become a city of the very wealthy and the very poor, which is frankly where the Upper West Side is. And I was so interested, Jose, to hear about the different communities in Brooklyn. You have to construct a program that is going to make that a reality and not leave us in the situation where we are now, where landlords have so corrupted the process. We could talk about a dozen ways they've done that, from political donations to harassing out tenants, that it's not, the program as it is now is not viable. So de Blasio is asking for improvements through vacancy decontrol and a number of other things, but I'm suspect of any new 421A program that doesn't have real protections for tenants. The last one has failed our tenants.
So June is showtime, right? All of these rent laws are up for either just getting rid of them or starting from new and refreshing. But how much juice does the mayor have? Like, it's not up to him when the rubber meets the road. These are things that come down from another Rosenthal and
Thank
the folks
goodness.
in the state.
My sister in government.
So how much political capital do you think the mayor is willing to expend on this to make, like 421A has been stealing all of the headlines, but is the mayor really going to go to bat for this to get these laws for the city?
I think he's very sincere in his support. I mean, he's put out a platform that's shorter than ours, has fewer planks than ours, and we could talk about that, but is on the right track. It hits the highlights. It shows that he understands the two basic problems that are undermining rent regulation today, which is vacancy deregulation and increases during vacancy. And I think he's serious. We've never had a mayor who was on our side when the rent laws were renewed before. So whatever good it does is an addition to what the cards we had in our hands 4 years ago, the last time we went through this. As you know, Albany is crazy, and you don't know what's going to happen until it happens. But we're in a stronger position than we were 4 years ago.
So Tish James was here for one of our town halls and used this little adage that what real estate is to New York as Texas is to oil kind of thing. So you talked about these, like 421A is a popular program, and that these landlords aren't having regulated apartments out of the goodness of their own hearts. It was part of a scheme to build housing that folks could afford. But landlords are cast as the bad guys here. How many of the landlords and what scale of property are we looking at? Is it people who have these huge new developments? Is it across the scale? Because a lot of folks came to me after and said, I am a landlord, but I'm just making it as well. I'm not getting rich off of these things. I have expenses. So who are the landlords who are the bad actors, and what do you think that percentage is?
I can't speak to that. I don't know if one of you guys can, but let's
just tangentially
look
from your experience,
right.
even.
But let's look at the reality of how the Rent Guidelines Board thinks about and what has resulted in the increases of over 16% over a period spanning, 10 years or something.
Okay.
But those increases happened because landlords convinced the Rent Guidelines Board that their expenses far exceeded the rents they were getting. They have never come to the table to open up their books. They've never said, here are my finances. Let me show them to you. Let me show you exactly why we need this increase of 5%, 7%, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And when you actually look and compare what those landlords are letting the Department of Finance know about their income and their expenses, in fact, their costs have only gone up by 11%. So when the landlords in these discussions are willing to come to the table with serious negotiation, opening up their books, really being honest about what their costs are, then I'm willing to have a real dialogue about that. Otherwise, look, there are a handful of bad actor tenants for sure, but they do not represent the full 1.1 million apartments, 2.5 million tenants who live in these apartments and are hanging on by a thread.
Okay. Now, I was reading in the paper today, it says that Assemblyman Keith Wright and tenants at his Harlem complex recently settled a suit for an amount of $2 million. And in this complex, the investment firm, just like you spoke before, they made capital improvements. It was a 1-2 time thing, but then they were still, the tenants in this 1,200 unit complex were still being charged month after month after month for these fees. Now he heads the Assembly's Housing Committee in the state Democratic Party, and he said, if this is happening to me in my home, I can only imagine what the average New Yorker is going through. So when there's that much money involved, how do tenants get together to organize against that?
I think organize is the answer, right? I think that's what our organizations like Make the Road, and organizations in the Alliance for Tenant Power are trying to do in communities across the city. The reality is that whether we're talking about a huge building with hundreds or thousands of units, or a smaller building where there are 6 families, every single one of those families should have access to the same rights, and every single one of those families should be able to lead a respectful and dignified life in this city, right? And so we need to be sure, earlier you had mentioned Albany being crazy, whereas tenants, we need to be crazier. Right, and that's what we're hoping to
Write
do.
that down.
Tomorrow, just to make the pitch, May 14th, we're going to be at Foley Square at 5 o'clock, and we're going to be out there with thousands of tenants from all 5 boroughs, from counties in the north, and we're going to be sending exactly that message, that as tenants, if Albany's crazy, we need to be crazier. Right? We need to be here making a lot of noise alongside our friends in the council, but also our allies in the assembly. And we also need to take it upstate. And so we're going to be doing that later on in May. On June 9th, we're going to be busing thousands of tenants up to Albany so that folks see us in the hallways, in the bathrooms, under their desk. They need to see us and they need to feel us, because the reality is on June 15th, we can't lose. We can't lose again. We can't wait another 4 years and lose thousands of more units and have more families have to leave our city. This city is built on the backbone of these families. For us, lots of our members, lots of immigrants who are low-wage earners are living in these apartments.
Yeah.
And it's insane that we're living in a city that's saying we won't raise the wage, but we're going to raise your rent every single month. And so we need to be sure that they are organized. We need to be sure that we have their back, and we need to take this fight where the fight is, and that's Albany.
So we are literally in our last 60 seconds, so I'm going to ask each of you to divide up the time and try to answer for me what the city looks like when we've lost the last regulated apartment.
City of rich and poor.
Yeah, hundreds of thousands of people would be displaced without the benefits of rent regulation. It would be a dramatic change in the population of the city, very, very rapidly.
A city where the majority of our membership at Make the Road is paying north of 60% of their monthly income on rent. And so what are they left with? And I want viewers to think about that. If your entire check goes to rent, what are you left with?
Can I just say one quick thing to pick up on Jose's point? For anyone watching now, call your state legislator and tell them what you think. It's in the hands of Albany. So call your assemblyman, call your senator, and let them know that you're rent burdened.
Yeah.
And that means that you're likely to have to leave New York City, and that's not what we want.
And if you don't know their number, call 311. They'll
Yep.
share it with you. Give them your address. Thank you all
Yeah,
for
I can't say
being
enough.
here.
Thank you so much for being here.
See you tomorrow at
Appreciate you.
Foley Square.
Excellent.
5
5 p.m.